The Philippines' current learning crisis is further exacerbated by what the UNICEF sees as climate risks facing Filipino children. UNICEF has called for the Philippine government to make its nationally determined contributions, or NDC 3.0, child sensitive. What that means for a climate resilient education system, we're joined by UNICEF Philippines Chief of Education, Akihiro Fushimi. So good to see you, Aki-san. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's a very interesting role that you handle at the UNICEF now here in the Philippines as Chief of Education.
Yeah.
Could you take us through what that entails and the deliverables that you now have in your new role?
Okay. Let me start with UNICEF. So UNICEF is United Nations Children's Fund. So we work for every child in the world, particularly the most vulnerable ones, most disadvantaged children in the world. We have office in different countries across the world. Philippines is one of them. So in the Philippine country office, I serve as the Chief of Education since last year. And in our office, we have a program and something called a country program for children, through which we work with the government of the Philippines in different areas so that we can support the children in the Philippines across the country. So we have outcome areas or teams working for the health of children, for the nutrition, and for education, which is the learning and skills of the children from early childhood to the adolescent. And we also have a team working for child protection and also social policy. So supported by many other colleagues in the country. And we have two offices in the Philippines. One main office is in Manila, actually just across the corner. The other one is in BAM in Cotabato City as a field office for Mindanao.
And it's interesting that the lens you're taking here is climate. How to be climate resilient in the education system so the kids get the best out of the education they're getting.
Yeah.
Why climate?
So in the education program or the learning and skills outcome for the children in the Philippines, we do support children from the early childhood. So they do have a best start in life, and they have a foundational skills, social emotional skills in the primary level, and then go into the adolescents, so young people, to develop their skills for the employment and employability. This is really important, but in the Philippines, we know that there's a learning crisis. We do have very strong evidence to support that there's a challenge for the Filipino children in the Philippines and also young people to have basic foundational skills for them to survive and thrive. And there's another layer of that. There's a learning disruption in the Philippines. We know that Philippines is at the #1 in the world risk index. So they are very vulnerable to the natural disasters and other man-made disasters, climate-related events. So every year, these climate events happen. And many schools, from my observation and also data and information I have learned since I came here, shows clearly that the schools in the Philippines are not ready to withstand strongly to the extreme heats, or the stronger typhoons and floods and so on. So every year we see so many schools and classrooms have been damaged, and that as a result, classes are suspended or closed, and children lose their learning opportunities and time. I think that also adds to this learning crisis. So this learning disruption caused by the climate-related events and disasters is a really challenge. There's a sense of urgency, I think, among the DepEd, UNICEF, and other partners to tackle this crisis, and challenges would lead to our strategy to the learning crisis, to have better learning outcome and improvement in the education system.
That loss of learning time, pretty critical. I mean, kids, when the Department of Education says classes are canceled, they're happy. But when it all adds up, and you see that they're losing time from school, there is a loss. The fact that you're losing learning time, there is a loss in the ability for the child to get the best out of the education that they're supposed to have.
Absolutely. Yep.
What are the metrics like here in the Philippines compared to the rest of the world?
From the report, for example, EdCom2 report, they reported a very concerning figures, but that's a really useful information for us to think about how to cope with that. For example, we understand 85% of the schools in the Philippines suspended classes in the last school year. And from DepEd, we heard over 7,000 classes or classrooms in the past few years have been damaged. And from the field, when I visited, for example, a few months ago, I visited the schools in Aurora, which was hardly hit and damaged by the typhoons last year in 2024, because we provided support to those schools. We provided the temporary learning spaces, a school in the box, teaching kids, learning kids. So we went to monitor them, how it has been used. But then we found that there's a huge gaps in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of the readiness of the schools and teachers and learners, for example, to have the alternative modality for the learning continuity. If the classes are closed, then DepEd has a good strategy. I have to commend them to prepare those alternative delivery modes, which is about the module-based and the digital learning, hybrid models. But of course, if you look at the most challenging environment, there's no power, no devices, no internet connectivity, no materials and digital literacy. So we need to really build those capacity systems and equipment and materials for the schools and for the LGUs so that they can empowered and equipped with those learning disruptions.
We hadn't seen that in action in the pandemic. I would have presumed that those disruptions, we might have learned a few lessons there in trying to deliver education, maybe through a pandemic resilient sort of strategy.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because Philippines has one of the countries experienced the longest school closure in the world. I was in the regional office in UNICEF in Bangkok at that time during the pandemic, supporting countries in different areas. And we are really worried about the Philippines. And then, of course, we know there's a huge investment made that time in developing the learning platforms, learning materials, providing devices, doing some trainings to really cope with that challenges of the school closures during the pandemic. So there's a basis. So we are not starting from zero, but still, there is something we need to improve. And I think I believe that the current educational reform can help that. And also the people in the Philippines know that there are things they need to do or they have to overcome in terms of the learning continuity. So I think there's a hope and an opportunity.
There is hope, but then that phrase learning losses came up because of the pandemic. We did suffer and are continuing to suffer the scars of learning losses because of the restrictions the pandemic posed to children. So how do we move on from here then? Because our conversation is now intersecting between education and climate risk, which I would presume would also be pandemic resilient educational strategies.
So I think the climate smart education or climate resilient education we talk about have several components. So one is about how we can strengthen the education system as a whole. We need to look at the climate risks for children. We need to analyze them very properly, and we need to come up with how we can strengthen those data and evidence-based policies and plans, how we can finance them, how we can effectively and efficiently implement those measures. I think that's one point. The other one is obviously about teaching and learning. I think this is really critical to see that the Philippines is moving towards a direction that in the education system, let's say for K-12, they have a revised curriculum which intends and aims at integrating those climate issues and topics and knowledge, values, and attitudes to change the behavior of children and learners in their curriculum. I think this is really important. And third one is about safe and resilient school facilities. We hear and see and really are excited about this is being scaled up at the national level to roll out to the different districts and LGUs where the risks is highest for the climate disasters.
But are they addressing it from climate risks? It seems that it's a sort of an add-on. This conversation we're having is sort of in the periphery, but I know that your intention is to bring it front and center. Because in your press conference, you did make a mention that the UNICEF sees that the problem here in the Philippines is a real and widespread learning crisis. It seems that we're starting from a really bad place, but you say that we're starting from a good base. How do you then manage that gap?
This is really critical. I think we are not talking about either or. We have to look at climate smart and resilient education as part of the bigger education reform to achieve the fundamental changes in the way we do the business in education. I think, of course, with the families and communities and all the stakeholders from national, subnational levels and LGU levels, I think it's not add-on or afterthought. I see that, for example, DEPED, they have a very strong quality basic education development plan, which is a long-term plan looking at how they can achieve those agenda of to support teachers, to support children's well-being, to support the facilities and materials and training, to achieve the learning outcomes, to achieve empowered and employed Filipino citizens. I think this is a really a great plan, and in which I can see clearly those climate smart and resilient education concepts and visions are integrated. So this is not really adding on the new things, and also curriculum. They are really integrating different things into their subjects across the key stages of the education. So this is how we also really support from UNICEF perspective to make the education system resilient and stronger for the climate and other risks to achieve the better learning outcome.
But how do you communicate that? Because it's really not visible. Unlike maybe say malnutrition, poverty, it's in your face. You know that it's affecting children and the way they can absorb learning. How do you convince stakeholders that climate should be front and center, even as it's not really seen as a major deterrent or maybe even enabler?
I think this is a really key point about how we communicate, how we present, how we gather and generate the evidence and data and stories, and to tell it in a way that people understand and to see the points. For the climate, for example, there are a lot of information. In DEPED, I was really impressed the amount of data they gather from schools and from the district school divisions. When there's a disaster, for example, they have data on a daily basis, many times on one day. And then they also have school attendance. They also have children's learning outcome data, because they do really a learning assessment of reading and mathematics and science and social skills. So if we combine them, then we should be able to see what are the effects, if there are any effects or impacts, positive or negative, of all different events that happened in the country, including the climate disasters or the school suspensions, or the positive effects of teacher training, good materials, and new curriculum. So we need to do that, and we are doing it together with DEPED and other partners to gather those information so that we can communicate effectively, as you said. I think that's a really important point.
When are you releasing the results of the data?
So, for example, now we look at the curriculum issues. So we are just starting now. So early July, we are starting looking at the minimum required competency areas for the climate smart education, and then looking at the revised curriculum and teacher training, and the children's and teachers and school heads, their knowledge, skills, and behaviors around those areas, and then how we can support and improve it. So in the next 6 months, maybe we will have some information about that area, but there are other information and evidence as well. So maybe in the course of next 6 months, we could provide something, and so that I can come back here to talk about it.
Yeah, but you know what really sticks to me is the PISA assessment of 2022.
Yeah.
Because that's when that phrase came out, that we're at the bottom seller, bottom 10 of 81 participating countries in reading comprehension, math, science, second to the last in creative teaching.
Yeah.
This really put to the fore that there is a problem. So how do we work then from that knowledge that we're at the bottom seller, but we need to put climate action into place, right front and center, to get us out and improve the ratings in the next PISA assessment in 2026?
Okay. Thank you. I think one of the things we should remind ourselves is that learning assessment is like a medical checkup. It's for you to know the status of your health so that you can take interventions in a timely manner. So the PISA, for example, for the 15 years old in the world for the OECD countries, or the other assessment which we do with the countries in the Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, which is called Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metrics, which measure reading, writing, and mathematics of the 10 years old across the countries to see. Again, we can see the challenges and problems, but we need to use that wisely, that what happens, what didn't happen, and why it happens in that way. So if we see the challenges in mathematics of our grade 5 students in the Philippines, we need to look at the causes of that. We need to look at what makes a difference. So I think that's the way we look at the learning assessment, including PISA. So we can talk about learning crisis, but also we need to use that effectively to improve our education system. And climate is also the same. I think climate smart education is part and parcel of the education reform processes. So I can see that DepEd really is open to the partners to tackle this challenge, which is beyond education. They know that it's really encouraging for me to see that DepEd and other partners in the government, like ECCD Council for the Early Child Care and Development Council, or the Climate Change Commission, they all know that they cannot solve the challenge alone. They know the power of the partnership. It has been really encouraging for me and for us in the UNICEF and other partners to come together to tackle the issue.
How does the conversation change when you consider the conflict-afflicted areas, like say BARM? You've been there many times. There's a UNICEF office there,
Yes.
a local office in the Bangsamoro
Yep.
Autonomous
Region
region
of
of Mindanao, where basic education is still a need, something that has to be built from ground up.
Yep.
How can you bring in climate resilience
Yep.
education there? Is that an opportunity to actually go in right there, or build the basic education framework first before you get climate in?
Yeah, I went to BAM for the first time in 2019, actually, 6 years ago, when I was still serving as an education specialist in Bangkok for the regional office. I went there to start looking at this analysis of the situation in BAM for the education to develop the kind of a sector plan for the 2035. That's how we started to really support in the building the system, support building plans and budget allocation and basic education part. But then, as you can say, and the climate issues, of course, the children in BAM are equally, if not more, susceptible or at risk of being affected negatively by the climate hazards and disasters. So 3 weeks ago, our team in the UNICEF Manila and Cotabato, they came together to work with the MBSTE, the Minister of Basic, Higher and Technical Education. So MBSTE and the different officials from the municipalities to gather them to do the training to look at education, disaster, and climate lens, how they can incorporate those lenses into their planning processes. I think this is really a beginning, but I think that's a necessary investment in the BAM. Yeah.
Where's the biggest challenge, you think, in moving forward when it comes to BARM?
I think the challenge is the capacity, but capacity in a way that there are people, there are very capable people in BAM as well, of course. But how the government can use those talents in the way that contribute to the social development, particularly health, nutrition, education, child protection. These are really essential areas for human development. And of course, in the human capital are the assets we have, the best assets we could use for the development of the society and communities. And BAM needs that. And I think the balance, I think the BAM government could better to consolidate those human resources and talents and allocate them in the way and in the places that are needed most to achieve those collective actions. I think that's what we are supporting, of course, since the beginning as UNICEF in our office in Cotabato City and from the Manila office. And also we are kind of facilitating sometimes communication between Manila and Cotabato City so that we can learn from each other. Whatever we do in for example, DepEd could be shared with MBSTE in Cotabato so that they don't need to start from the scratch. They could learn and they could adapt into their own context.
And building on that, what learnings have you had and captured so far in areas outside conflict-afflicted areas? Maybe cite a case study, something that gives you hope that this can work. putting climate resilience
Yeah.
education strategies, and in which communities?
Let me just talk about the place I visited, Aurora. So I was there for the emergency response and then monitoring of what we have supported after the typhoon. And first of all, so there was a challenge of the classrooms. Of course, classrooms were damaged badly. So kids had to still, after several months after the typhoon, kids had to study in different places, either under the tents, somewhere in the corridor, somewhere in the head teachers' school heads' offices. But they are still very keen to come to school, to meet friends, to learn from teachers. I think there's a strong resilience. But that happens because of the teachers and because of the officials. Kids do not know them. But for example, the school division has a disaster risk leadership focal point who promotes DRR and also climate issues in the education sector. And in Aurora, I was able to meet them and to talk to them how they are coping with the aftermath of these typhoons, what are the challenges, how they mobilize the support from different offices, even borrowing some materials from the neighboring schools. And this DRR focal point for the school division office is facilitating that kind of very locally grown the solutions. So this is the resilience I'm talking about. This is something I want to see in every community in the Philippines. And I think that's the strong community spirit is there. It's only about materials and equipment and knowledge and some catalytic inputs and support we need to provide from the national level or from the provincial level to support those efforts on the ground. I think that's possible across the country.
I wanted to pick up on teacher because I feel that is central to
Yeah.
your visit in Aurora and
Yeah.
realizing that everything happens on the teacher level and their level of engagement. What have they talked to you about as the biggest challenge? And how do you think UNICEF can help them?
I think obviously the challenges they talk about was the lack of safe and learning facilities and environment in the school. They need to think extra about not only about their lessons, how to deliver their lessons and contents, but they need to think about how they can keep children safe. I think that was a really challenging one for them, which they didn't need to, but they had to now to think about on top of that. But I think that's also one of the great roles teachers can play. And the other one is about issues of mental health. I think this comes up quite strongly because of the damages and some of the experiences children had to go through after these typhoons and natural disasters or climate-related events at home and community and school. Children and also teachers themselves have to cope with that. And sometimes we asked specifically to support those mental health issues, well-being issues for the children, but also for the teachers. That's the frontline workers. I think this is really something we're also learning and we're also providing with the DSWD and DOH and DEPET together to provide that support. I think that's something I learned a lot and something we need to really prioritize clearly in these discussions.
And probably scale up, knowing the importance of the teacher.
Yeah.
In training that teacher, supporting the teachers to help the learner, not only in the way of curriculum, but really providing them the climate resilient, climate smart education focus. So what do you intend to do then in the next year or so in collaborating with all stakeholders in providing this kind of support? Just taking Aurora as an example.
I think what we are learning from Aurora and in other places in the country is, as you said, it's a critical importance and central role teachers can play. And particularly, not only the broker of knowledge of the contents around climate issues, but how they play a key role, a new role as a facilitator or the coach or guide for the children to take more active roles. I think that's really something we learned and we want to promote as part of the nationally scaled up teacher training, for example. Both the pre-service for the training for the to-be teachers, the future teachers in the country, for them to learn about how to do it, what it's all about, and also the teachers in service, hundreds of thousands of them in the country. We really want to work with them a lot around how they can change their own behaviors so that they can serve as a lot of facilitators to empower and inspire children to become a change agents for the climate actions.
How do you take that on a national level then? Because that conversation is local government level, get all the actors taking part in that full ecosystem, but then you want to scale it up and make sure it makes sense to the national government. What struggles have you faced so far in your year and 3 months here, trying to communicate what you're trying to do on a local level successfully?
This is what UNICEF is all about. We work with local communities. We learn about what and how it could work and how we can talk to the decision makers, policy makers, and high senior officials in the central government to make it scale. I think this is what we do. And for example, in this case of the teacher training, for example, Teacher Education Council is our cross partner, and the DEPED is our partner. We do have something called System Capacity Grant, which we manage with the World Bank together to support the education system strengthening in the DEPED in the country. And then as part of that, we have a program and intervention to review and to improve the curriculum for all teachers in the higher education institutions in the Philippines. So this is the lessons we learn on the ground, and we take it up to the central level exactly, and how we can scale it up and integrate and institutionalize for the sustainable results. And climate change and climate smart education is one of them.
What happens though when you receive news that the national budget, the education budget in the national budget's been cut? We haven't even gotten to the discussion of funds and the investment that goes to getting even climate smart with our education system. Where do you go from there then? With budget cuts in the education department and funding, support coming from UNICEF and all your other stakeholders, how do you make that work around?
I think first of all, I really like to commend the government of the Philippines to prioritize the education sector, which receives one of the highest allocation in the national government and in the national budget. I think that's really a necessary investment in the human capital, human development in the country, and how DEPED and other attached agencies and also other agencies in the education sector could make the most of that investment is really the key question. It's not only about quantity, it's about quality or efficiency, it's about equity. So how you look at the difference. The Philippines is a really diverse, beautiful country, but the needs and resources available are very different. So they need to really have a targeted allocation and interventions based on the equity lens, where the needs are the largest and the greatest. So the quantity, quality, and equity, I think, and then also transparency is a key part. And so the climate should be the part of this education reform, not, as I said, not add-on or not separate additional cost, which is a necessary cost embedded in the education reform, which you serve and which you make education and schools stronger to the climate-related hazards and disasters, so that you avoid the disruptions, you ensure the learning continuity, which will lead to the learning, better learning outcomes to overcome this crisis.
Are you still on track though with your own targets, your timeline, despite the budget cuts from the national government?
I think so. I think I really see the ongoing educational reform of the government, supported by all the stakeholders and partners, including UNICEF, is a very ambitious one. But I think I see the momentum, I see the willingness from all parties to really join hands. So from that perspective, I understand there are some budget cuts, but still I think there are some ways to mobilize and leverage other resources in the system. So I can see that there's there's a critical moment which we really feel privileged to be part of that.
In other words, get creative and find solutions
I think so.
and bridge that gap. To ask the government to be a child sensitive in the nationally determined contributions 3.0.
Yeah.
Would that be too much of an ask though? Because when you look at the NDCs, they don't really include climate smart education strategies. It's not there. It's not a core goal. So might there be a disconnect then in what UNICEF is asking the Philippine government do and put climate smart in the NDC 3.0?
If I look at the Philippines social sectors like health, education, and nutrition, and so on, they have a really good policies and laws and systems in place. And I think NDCs, I understand it focuses more on the mitigation part rather than adaptation. So but still, there is a recognition of the issues of children in the NDC, but it's not very explicit. It's not very focused. One thing I think we could do, there are several things, but one thing is to really leverage the voice of children and young people in the country. We cannot really ignore them. We have to listen to them because that's their problem. That's their challenge. That's their opportunities in the next generation. So I think that's something we can do or we must do. The other one is to mobilize the partnership. There are so many partners in the civil society, academia, private sector. They all talk about their concerns, their contributions to climate, but it's not combined. I think we need to create a synergy of all different partners with the government, not against, but with the government. And thirdly, I think as UNICEF, as an international organization and UN organization, we have offices and network of the many countries in the world. So I can see some good practices in the NDC, for example, to be very child sensitive in some countries in the region, Asia Pacific region. So we could benchmark them. We could look at
which ones? Could you give us an example?
I saw some
the ASEAN?
Pacific islands, for example, the Vanuatu, for example, has a really strong one, looking at their school governance, their teachers and curriculum and school facilities in the NDC. So why can't we not do it? It should be possible. It's about the will. It's about determination. I think this is something we continue to do in the next several months so that NDCs can be more child sensitive and to be more explicit about those support to the social sectors. Because that's very important to unlock some finances, for example. The Global Climate Fund or some funding, both externally and internally, could be, or that they need the specific reference to those NDC commitment. So I think that's also something, some incentive for the NDC to be more child sensitive so that we can unlock some of the resources to support, to even further strengthen and enhance climate smart and resilient education.
You mentioned the Global Climate Fund. This is the Green Climate Fund.
This
is the landmark.
Yes.
It's the biggest climate fund out there in the world, coming out of the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
How does this all roll up then? We're talking about the Philippines as one, and also the most devastated under the World Risk Index. How can we harness the availability of that fund in the Green Climate Fund because of the needs that you've just cited? It's climate sensitive.
So I think this is a something for us to support the government to unlock those finances, like Green Climate Fund, for the sectors we support and work. We need that, and so it's a chicken and egg, but the NDC have to be first to look at child-sensitive policies and the strategies. So I think that's how we want to really mobilize. And there are other opportunities as well, which I was reminded yesterday by a colleague from GGGI. This is the Global Green Growth Institute. Yeah, they also talked about the critical importance of NDC and our advocacy and support to that end.
So the UNICEF can lobby for the Philippines to get some money from the Green Climate Fund?
To support, yes, of course. Yes, that's why we want to really work on the NDC part as well, to bring more resources made available for the Philippines. Yes.
Given what the data has shown so far, what kind of maybe timeline you're setting for yourself and your stakeholders in building a more focused, climate resilient education strategy, what we've just talked about, have you set out timelines, and what are you hoping to achieve in that period?
Obviously, this is the making the education system climate smart and resilient is a long-term undertaking, which requires a lot of investment and partnerships.
Are we talking 10, 20 years?
We need to look at both the 10, 20 years vision as well as the immediate actions to take. For example, we have to make schools and learning facilities and environment more safer and more resilient. We have supported the DEPED in the past couple of years to develop something called Comprehensive School Safety Framework Pillar 1 Guidebook for the safe and resilient school facilities. This is ready. This is ready to be rolled out to be to influence the way we build classrooms and schools and repair them. So this is going to be launched soon in July, so that we can really, have the better standards and stronger school facilities. So that's one of the points. And the curriculum thing is not next 6 months. So we have those milestones, but I think we need to, and again, I think the decentralization is a key for the national government to work with the LGUs and partners at that level to mobilize funding to make investment quickly to support that climate actions. These are the things we should do in the next 6 months, a year, and 2 years. But at the same time, we need to look at longer term horizon through the strategic planning.
Is AI part of that playbook that you just mentioned, launching in July? Because there have been conversations around AI possibly widening the digital divide.
Yeah.
And we're just talking here about the climate resilience divide that we're now challenged with.
AI, we must make AI as a
Must.
we must make AI as a powerful and useful tool to work for us, right? I think there's a real danger of widening the gaps, of course, because of the AI for the learning.
For both digital and climate.
Digital and climate
resiliency.
too, yes, learning and learning continuity and ensuring safe learning spaces and so on. I think we must make that work for us. And that's something DEPED has already, for example, they have launched the AI in Education Center. And then we are also talking to some partners like Google and other colleagues to how we can tap on AI to make learning better, to work for the most vulnerable children in Philippines and some other countries. So I think this is a really exciting moment, but we have to really be mindful of the power, potential, and also risks of the AI.
So it's still a toss-up whether it can benefit
Yes.
or it can.
We must make it work for us.
It must. It must. I know that you've got kids. You've got two.
Yes.
You brought them over here in the Philippines.
Yes, of
Do
course.
they know the noble job that you do for UNICEF and why they had to come here to the Philippines?
So I have two boys. They're twins. They will be 14 this year. So they're entering the adolescent now. And this is the 5th country they live in the past 14 years. So they kind of understand why we are moving. And then I'm trying to always, explain what I do by showing something I wrote, by showing some interviews like this, and showing some presentation I make in the forum and conference. And also at the same time, the children in the schools, both in the public schools in the Philippines, also the international schools, they all learn about the climate, sustainable development goals, and challenges they face in the 21st century. So they can kind of resonate what I'm doing, what they're facing, and also in the Philippines. In the past 15 months, they also saw firsthand, experienced the typhoons and floods and so on to see in some parts of Manila. So I think that's something they are beginning to appreciate and understand and look at themselves in that context. And then I like them to be more aware of that. So I'm planning to take them around the provinces in the Philippines to show the beauty and also some of the realities.
Well, I hope they learn a lot more as I have in this conversation. Aki-san, arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you so much.
Yoroshiku onegaishimashita. Thank you so
Maraming
much. Catch us again next Thursday, 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And if you haven't done so, like or follow my social media pages. I'm Cathy Yang, and this is Thought Leaders.